Are we?
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Tripp, and Diana and I are here to ruin your coffee, most likely. But we have assistance today. We got Tim Whitaker from the new Evangelicals. So thank you for being here, Tim, and helping us ruin things.
You're welcome.
And
Tim is good at it.
I can ruin coffee right now for everyone. I'm drinking 7-Eleven blueberry coffee, and it slaps.
Oh, God.
I see that face.
Oh, yeah. I figured there were some coffee fundamentalists around these parts, and deconstruct it. This is delicious.
Oh, man.
Yum.
Now, I just have water this morning in a wild goose glass. Look at there. Wild goose beer glass.
I love that. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. You clearly are proselytizing because Deborah loves blueberry coffee too. And I'm just concerned about that, you know?
Well, I don't want to scare either of you, but I've been on this blueberry coffee kick now for probably close to a year. And in my community and the spaces I operate in, it's like a big joke. But now people are DMing me going to 7-Eleven, trying the blueberry coffee and saying, "You're right, it's so good." And so now I'm essentially have become a new evangelical of a new kind, proselytizing the good message of 7-Eleven blueberry coffee. And people are actually doing it, which kind of scares me.
Oh,
but they're doing it. I mean, it's really happening. I get probably 2 or 3 DMs a day now saying, "Hey, just try blueberry coffee. It was so good." So there you go.
Tim, I can honestly say that I have no other friend that is a 7-Eleven influencer.
What can I say?
well, there you go. If you deconstruct yourself right out of a job, Tim, now you know what the frontier of your work is.
Yes, I have a backup plan.
I just want Tripp to turn into the rubber ducky influencer. That's honest.
Well, so you can't see this, but I actually have gray shorts that have little matching duckies all over them.
Okay, let's not see that.
And my son, oldest, is getting inducted into the French Honor Society or something this afternoon. And when I dropped him off at school, he said, "Dad, you meet me here at this time, we'll go, and don't wear any of the ducks. Don't wear the ducks. There'll be a lot of friends there." I was like, "Elgin, this is a Mark McNary outfit, like the South's most influential fashion designer." And he goes, "You are not a fashion designer." And I was like, "All right, but I think it matches my hat, where the bill and the greens and stuff." And this is the Greensboro Grasshoppers, our local minor league team. And he's like, "You can wear it to a baseball game, not my French Honor Society induction."
That's funny.
Apparently, I am the only normie on this Zoom call.
Well,
I have on a Land's End t-shirt, and that's it. And I'm drinking water.
Well, so we're gonna ruin dinner, but first, Diana.
Yes.
So Tim and I, and then you and I were talking about doing something because of the predicament lots of people are in around the election, and then it's either yes or no to Christian nationalism and wanting to widen the conversation and such. And maybe you should tell the origin story of the faith and politics class and such, and then before we get into ruining things.
Oh, well, I'm not entirely sure what the origin story is or how far you want me to go back, but most recently it had really occurred to me that the only conversation we're having right now about faith and politics is about white Christian nationalism. And what that means, of course, is that people are going on to Twitter and other social media and white Christian nationalism, you're either for it or against it. And if you're really against it, which we three are, and we see a lot of stuff on social media, there's just like so much bad energy about any kind of Christianity and politics, because that's all people think. That's what people think it is. It's white Christian nationalism. And I think there's all kinds of reasons for that, and we'll get into it a little bit more in the class. But I got kind of disturbed by that, because every time you see negative stuff go into social media about white Christian nationalism, I feel like 5 people leave the church, and so, and what it shows to me is that there's an incredibly thin understanding of faith and politics, and that people have completely lost their memory about the multitude of options there are to talk about and to engage in religion and politics, especially Christianity and politics. So basically, Tripp and I got to talking about this problem that we do have to address white Christian nationalism. We have to address the negative stuff, and people want to know about it, but so often people leave it there and don't present positive options. And so Tripp and I just said, hey, what if we represent 4 or 5 or however many alternatives to white Christian nationalism, so you don't have to just be yes or no to one thing, and that thing being a very provocative and negative thing. Even in congregations, it's a very explosive conversation to have. But instead, talk about some of these other things as well, and just refresh people's memories about the rich traditions that Christianity holds. And so that's our class. That became our class, is to do 2 sessions on Christian nationalism and where it comes from, exactly what it is, so people have kind of better working definitions in their head. And then to present 4 of the historic options in the voices of leading experts in those traditions, who happen to be friends of ours, who are wonderful presenters. And so then Tripp said, hey, Tim Whitaker wants to do something like this. So I said, we got to have Tim come along. And so that was it.
Yeah. And Tim, I know as someone who professionally clicks, don't show me more things like this when it's right wing, kind of, the right wing kind of intensity of complaining. I mute all those, and then we became friends, and the algorithm keeps showing me more of it because we're friends.
Yep.
And then we've got to know each other, and a bunch of people from the new Evangelicals community, and I've interacted in such an you convinced me, along with moving back to the States, that it was a bigger deal than I thought. But for those that might be joining something like this, where their faith community is one that has increasingly been centered around this kind of ugly expression of pseudo-Christian engagement in the public square, maybe tell like what it's like for you in the community you're in, of discovering the kind of these rich options beyond, right, the battle for being militantly culture dominant in America.
Well, the difficult part is that for people like myself, this is all we really know is the only option. It's like this, or just don't become a Christian anymore, right? Like there's no other way of doing this, which is why I'm actually really excited for this class. Because Tripp, I think you and I first threw around like the first version of this almost probably a year ago, of like, we should do something on Christian nationalism, maybe get some people involved and do like a class. And I'm really glad that it's evolved to this, what I would call is like a better path forward option of like, well, at this point, especially in our circles, people really know, because of the advocacy of folks like ourselves and many others, Jamar Tisby and tons of other folks who have been just blasting this from the rooftops, saying we have a major problem. There is a lot of literacy around Christian nationalism, what it is, the data on it. We cover it at least once a month on our podcast with Andrew Whitehead. We're doing a whole production on it for YouTube still. So people are a lot of times they tell me, okay, Tim, I get it. This is a threat. It's problematic. I get it. What do I do?
Right.
Where do I go from here? And frankly, my role in a lot of this is kind of representing the audience, because I'm very much in process myself. I am a product of white conservative evangelical culture, which means for me, I'm still very much in the headspace of exploring other ways of being Christian that I just never knew were possible. So doing a class like this, where we have some pretty top tier folks coming in, who really know what they're talking about from other, what I would call our rooms of the Christian tradition, who are going to expose us to, yeah, y'all, it's kind of weird that you think this is your only option, because there are so many better ways of engaging in politics as Christians that are rooted in justice, love, inclusivity, and non-dehumanization that benefits all of our neighbors. So frankly, I'm excited to help facilitate, but I'm also excited to learn, because a lot of what I'm trying to go through too is like, there's got to be a better way. Like, I know there's so much more going on. I just don't know much about the other positions that we can hold as Christians, that also, once they're unpacked, I think will make a lot more sense to our audience, right? Because a reason why so many of us deconstructed or left was because we couldn't reconcile love your enemy with cross building for our enemies, right? As you say, Tripp, right? Like, it didn't make any sense to us. So we know it doesn't make sense. So what does make sense? What does line up with the teachings of Jesus that's very Christian, but also engaged in our current, cultural moment?
Yeah. I'm excited about it. faithandpolitics.net. You can donate if you want. You don't have to, and you'll get an email that hook you up. There'll be a series of these short lectures that you'll get in advance, and then we'll have live stream and things where we can discuss questions, unpack it, see what happens. But it should be fun. Feel free to do it alone, with a group online, or with a group of people that you like hanging out with. Meaning, try it with people you don't like hanging out with, because who doesn't have people are running at a deficit of awkward conversations about religion and politics these days. He was like, when does this ever come up?
And one of the things that I really was committed to make sure we do is have the the lecture pieces be 30 minutes long, so that at the end, like next fall, if a church group wanted to use it in a congregation, we could use it during adult education hour, and you'll have a 30-minute lecture. You can have 15 to 20 minutes of discussion, and they'll be about things like liberation theology and Bonhoeffer and the Niebuhr brothers. And I'm actually really excited about Tim, you getting to know some of these people. I don't know if you've ever met Jen Harvey, for example, who is the academic dean at Garrett Theological Seminary in Chicago. And she actually grew up in a family, I think, of 12 children in Colorado Springs, and was homeschooled in sort of the heartbeat of the originating movements of what becomes Christian nationalism. And she was a student of mine when I taught years ago at Westmont College, and she started basically deconstructing her faith there. Went to Union Seminary and studied with James Cone, and has written several great books about, like one called Raising White Kids. But she herself is also lesbian and queer. And so she's written widely in those traditions as well. And so Jen is just a super smart person who came right out of the heart of the most conservative strains of evangelicalism, and yet is still, she's a seminary dean. And so she deconstructed, but she didn't leave, because there were options. And that's part of my hope. It really hurts me when people just say, oh, I can't be part of, Christian nationalism, so I can't be a Christian.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So somebody quick, and this will be my last comment about the class, but there was a comment in the stream where one woman said, the most conversation we have right now about faith and politics is about Judaism. And one of the things that's really interesting, if you know anything about Jewish sort of political theologies, you know that they've got the same problem, because right now Zionism is being interpreted by one group of Jews, and that is a very right-wing government in the state of Israel, and very, very, very fundamentalist. Their equivalent of our Christian nationalists are the public expression of Jewish political theology, aka Zionism. But what most people don't know is there are as many forms of Zionism as there are forms of Christians thinking about what the kingdom of God means.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see people like all over the internet saying, oh, the problem's not Israel, the problem is Zionism. That is actually one of the stupidest things that people can say, because it's like saying for us, oh, the problem, isn't it isn't just Christian nationalism, the problem is something, else. Is the problem is that Christians think about the kingdom of God too much, or something really dumb. And so anyway, there's diversities of political theologies for us and for our Jewish friends. And what is happening right now is that some of the better options, the richer, healing, shalom, peaceable options, are being silenced by these radical, violent, nationalist, exclusive interpretations of political theology. And so I think that the whole conversation is even a little bit bigger than what we imagine it to be. It's big enough in our sphere, but if you sort of expand the boundaries a little bit, we begin to see that it's actually a problem in other faith traditions as well. And this might be one of the primary sort of driving ideological problems of global politics and how we're all going to get to the future, where we can handle actually things like, climate change and stuff that could destroy us in a moment or a decade.
That same problem is also within kind of the public reflection on Islam.
That's
right?
correct.
Where when the public square treats as normative the authoritarian militaristic expression, and that's like the pure version, and then any Muslim, Christian, or Jew who finds their deepest convictions in response to God, also including solidarity for the other, the recognition of oppression, and all those kinds of things, then you're like, yeah, well, you're not like a real Christian, right? Like what the new atheist did to Islam is happening in the present towards Christianity and Judaism in the public square. And underneath that is this sense that our public conversation around religion, like the way in which religion funds public engagement, political engagement, activism, and things, is one that is somehow treating as normative a thoroughly modern expression of all three religions. All three, the ugly militaristic kinds, are modern expressions of a tradition where it's seeking to coerce its neighbors or if they're from the underside, using terrorism and stuff to exploit things. And I find that like part of what a healthier public square does is especially in a pluralistic context, is it takes time to get to know the diversity of people that belong in different religious traditions. In the same way, right? Like you don't make normative non-religious people's expression just equals, they're just like the atheist Marxists, putting people in internment camps. There's that desire to dismiss large portions of the human population by the worst actors within a group is problematic. I know Tim at the New Evangelicals, they use that like not dehumanizing, right? And part of not dehumanizing is allowing traditions to have the complexity and diversity of perspectives that are there. And one of the goals I think that Diana and I've kind of are deeply invested in, and something I know that New Evangelicals tries to use the platform to give, is like there's a lot thicker, richer account of even our own tradition, and one where participating as a disciple can be life-giving to neighbors, to enemy, to hopefully our non-human neighbors as well.
I was going to say that actually segues really well into our conversation today. We want to talk about the toxic public square.
Yeah.
This is one of the ways that it's toxic, is that we're taking, as you said, normative, the very worst actors in religion. And that both erodes the public square and it also erodes religious traditions themselves. And Yeah, and I worry about both of those things for different reasons. And I think many of the people who are with us in the Ruining Dinner communities feel that same way too. I think they're worried. They're worried about this misuse of the complexities of religion.
All right, so here's one of the questions that came in, and y'all can go wherever you want with this one. But there were a number of them around this. And let's see, Ryan put it this way. Does voting for a third-party candidate matter? I want to, because of all the moral complexities of voting for either option in the present, despite one feeling more detestable than the other. But using your vote for a third party feels pointless, and I feel extremely discouraged. And there were others that were like, it apart from the last year and a half of foreign policy blunders, in a sense, by the Biden administration, they would have been gung-ho for helping him get reelected and such. But now it feels so much morally complex. Like, how do y'all process that, the current predicament?
Ryan, that's a great question. And my answer is incredibly simple. In 1980 was the first election I could vote in. And I voted for John Anderson, who was the independent candidate over and against both Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. And I will never stop regretting that vote as long as I live, because John Anderson drained just enough votes. I mean, I literally made that exact argument that Ryan just made. The moral complexity is too much. And I felt like because of like Iran-Contra, or not Iran-Contra, because of the hostage crisis in Iran-Contra comes later, of course, under Reagan, and several other things that I disliked that the Carter administration did, particularly on international policy, I voted for a stupid. I mean, he wasn't stupid. He was admirable, actually. He was a very admirable person. But I threw my vote away, and throwing a vote away in that election meant that Ronald Reagan won in 1980. And Tim Whitaker's entire life was changed because of that. My stupidity in voting for John Anderson, and enough other people were about as stupid as I was. And then we can also look at Al Gore in 2000. I'm sorry. I wish we had a multi-party system in the United States. We do not. You have two choices. You have the really terrible choice, and you have the less terrible choice. And that's what it means to live in a nation-state democracy in the early 21st century, is you make imperfect choices, and your moral complexity sometimes has to just stand on the side while you hold your nose and you pull the gosh darn lever. And I almost swore there because, and I did not vote for Ralph Nader because I voted in 1980 for freaking John Anderson. And I literally, the rest of my political life, I have lived trying to make up for that stupid choice when I was 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I really have strong feelings about this, obviously.
No, you do. I have a question, Diana, because you're the historian, not me. Didn't my recollection, and I was born in 88, so this is before I was even a thing. But didn't Reagan like destroy Carter? Wasn't it like 48 states swung for Reagan? Like 400 electorates or something? Wasn't it like a landslide?
No, it was not. It was the Carter Reagan election was a lot closer. I have to go back and look at the exact.
Oh, I am thinking of.
You're thinking of his second
You're thinking
election.
of 84.
That's what I'm
which
thinking
was
of.
an absolute landslide.
Okay.
When
Morning in America,
Reagan
1984.
Dukakis, I believe.
Yeah, it was like a crazy, right? Like it's like the whole country's like red besides like 2 states went blue or something like that. That's what I'm thinking of.
That's 84. No, 80 was very close. And it was remarkably like the situation we have right now. A one-term Democratic president who sort of came in looking like a hero, and then partway through his presidency winds up showing, the sort of the painful underbelly of being a president, and also a certain amount of, weakness as a leader and other things. And people politically manipulated that forward in such a way that Ronald Reagan would win. And I would have to, if Mondale in 84. Sorry, thanks, Dan Foster. I couldn't remember. Dukakis was 88, I guess. And so anyway, that's what happened. 80 was close, and 80 was a squeaker. I was actually in London then on election night, and everybody was up and just literally glued to the BBC, walking down the streets in London, televisions in windows and shops and the whole thing. And everybody was just waiting for the announcement. And boy, when it said that Reagan won, people were absolutely, people, I thought about staying in England. It was my equivalent of what people are talking about now regarding Trump.
Yeah, I think I'm full of contradictions and tension on this, because part of me is so pragmatic, where I think, listen, pragmatically, I mean, between Project 2025, between just all the stuff, to me, it's pretty clear that like democracy is on the ballot this year. And on the other hand, I'm just so furious that like this is the hand that we're given by two organizations who are not even government entities, but are nonprofit organizations that have hijacked our election process. Like that just burns me up, personally. Where here we are in 2024, and these are the two choices we're given. And yes, I am. I'm furious at Biden for funding the nation state of Israel with bombs that are killing children. Like that to me really angers me. And so I'm not one to fault people who would look at that and be like, I'm out, and this is what you guys get for doing this. I get that. I think, though, pragmatically for me, I think about what you said, Diana, a lot, where I'm like, I think that at this point, they're both going to be horrible on foreign policy, and one of them might literally burn down the country for real and usher in like a new level of authoritarianism that is funded by billionaire conservative people, and also a well-established shadow network of Christian nationalists who are ready to take over. I mean, this is not a secret. You can read the 900-page manifesto from Project 2025, where they say, we are going to abolish the Department of Education. We are going to wage the war on woke and eradicate all DEI initiatives. I mean, it is if Charlie Kirk himself was just like given a book to write on what he wants for the country. And when you add that on top of just the nature of who Trump is, the level of consistent lying, the level of willing to use power and control to punish political enemies, along with the right-wing media complex that has only grown. Okay, it's not shrinking. I mean, the fact that Alex Jones is back in the limelight in those spaces should absolutely make our jaw drop. Right. The fact that Nick Fuentes was allowed back on X and is back to tweeting actual anti-Semitic stuff and is back to working with people, trying to network. The fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke at his conference a couple of years back and that Trump met a man like that. I'm just reading the room, you know? And again, like I do it personally. I read the room begrudgingly and angrily. I'm ticked that this is where we are. But that's just kind of how I view it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know too much.
One of the questions, and I've had quite a few conversations in the past few weeks with friends who would have started in a much more evangelical space, got to deconstruct, end up in a more progressive Christian thing, and their experience or the way they're feeling about what's going on in Israel and Palestine, in part, right, because we see it so much more in social media and things, makes it feel like a very different ethical decision. And I haven't figured out a way to say this, so y'all can tell me. But as someone who was a Christian socialist that was against the military-industrial complex after how we acted in after 9/11, I don't think I've ever voted for a president that I didn't think the military-industrial complex is
supported.
The one by bipartisan consensus that is overturning democracies if it helps us expand the markets, that we aren't selling weapons. Like, we literally support Saudi Arabia, which is where the actual hijackers of 9/11 come from. We keep fundamentalist Muslims in charge of a nation where you see the population resisting. We demonize countries that would be technically our better ally, but they don't want a globe run by us. Like, there's so many things where I'm like, I agree with your moral assessment. I just don't know when I've ever had an opportunity to vote for someone who doesn't put the flag before everything else. And by the flag, we mean the military and capitalism. Right. So and I talked with a friend of mine who, I imagine you'll both know, so I'm not going to use their name, but we've been friends a long time. And I remember when we first met in the emerging church movement and stuff back in the day. Yeah, he was like, I voted for Bush and all these, and I was ranting at him then. And, I had a little bit of hope when Obama came in that was then shot over, that our foreign policy wasn't going to be any different, that somehow the person that got a Nobel Peace Prize became more efficient because he had more moral cover for droning. Right. Even like having a kill list that included American citizens. Right. So when you kill an American citizen and their friends and family at a birthday party, how did that not impact you in a similar way that what's going on? Like, and we could list off what did we do to Haiti? Haiti, we've killed way more people in Haiti because of our foreign policy than we ever killed. So like there's like all of like, to me, I wonder how much of this is that Americans are so insular that unless it's in front of them, they never notice the moral complexity of our foreign policy. That we've got a kill list that is crazy. And if you take the number of deaths because of our economic running of the order post World War II, it's even bigger. Mm-hmm. Right. And so this is something that, and I don't know the right way of framing it, to be like, don't worry, we've been this horrible for a long time.
Right.
But like that, it's an exception. And the uncomfortable part for me is I like completely cut off the idea of being an evangelical because of the Islamophobia after 9/11. And I feel similar about the way Judaism is being inscribed right into this one militaristic expression of Zionism. And that is uncomfortable for me in other ways, even though like I've been reprimanded for 15 years of calling the treatment of Palestinians an apartheid state. I thought Jimmy Carter was right. And I had to quit a foreign policy class in undergrad because a Christian nationalist was running it. And I told him he was neither Christian nor a nationalist in class. And I had to go switch classes in the middle of it. So like none of our convictions, I had these conversations with friends, were really different. It was just from my perspective, the critique of our military and our economic system has always been there. And so voting is a harm reduction strategy, not the coming of the kingdom of God. But, it could have been, I just read too much Reinhold Niebuhr, and then maybe Kevin will present that option in a compelling way in the class. But does that make sense? Because it's like I want to endorse the intuitions and the ethical intuitions and the ugliness and all that kind of stuff. But then I want to go, I gave $7,000 to the military industrial complex after I did the math on my taxes. Yeah. And
I wish mine would have been that little.
So you just need 3 more kids, Diana. Talk to Richard.
Think that ship has sailed, as they say. I guess we're going to adopt. But I don't quite know where this happened, but somewhere we've decided, or some portion of the population has decided, that when we elect a president, we're electing a savior. And that is both a thing that we see on left and right. It was truly a problem around Obama. It is absolutely a problem around Trump. I think that it is the problem around Biden, is that people want someone to save everything, fix everything, save everything. And I remember a president was just some guy who lived in Washington who, you you picked one. Hopefully they made good laws. They made your life better. Maybe took your taxes were reduced a bit. You got got great loans for college for your kids. Good. More power to them. It didn't make much of a difference. I literally can remember when whoever was president, other than my grandmother used to make a big deal about Roosevelt, because Roosevelt really did make a difference. I mean, he in effect, he saved and politically saved America in a desperate time. But all these last elections, everybody wants the savior president, and we're not getting that because we live in this deeply flawed political global arrangement. I was talking to a rabbi the other day who's a good friend of mine. We went out for lunch, and boy, you want to hear somebody talk about Netanyahu? Take a rabbi friend out to lunch. They literally rabbis in the United States are not on board with what's happening over there. They're really furious.
Yeah.
And but anyhow, I was talking to him, and we got into many of these issues, Tripp, and I was sounding rather like you over the lunch. And he just looked at me and he said, this is the whole problem of nation states, period. And that's the way the globe is organized. We are a planetary sort of spread of this thing called nation states, which are loosely based around some old ethnic lines or religious lines that have expanded into pure or pseudo constitutional sorts of political entities, many of them with some sort of democratic format. And this is just the way the world is organized. And those nation states are undergirded by exactly what you said, Tripp. They're undergirded by the military industrial complex. And the last time we had a president who ever even uttered those words is the year I was born. Dwight Eisenhower, in 1958 or 59. I was born in 59. And he said that, he talked about that on his way out. We cannot do this. We cannot be that kind of nation state. And what did we do? We promptly became that nation state. And that's what all nation states are. And these are problems of living in this world. We're not going to have Zion. We're not going to have the kingdom of God. We're not going to have the pure Islamic republic based on Sharia law. We're not going to have Buddhist enlightenment. We're not going to have a pure Hindu state. We're not going to have any of those things because we have this other thing. And maybe 100 years from now, this thing will not exist. And maybe this is part of it going away. But right now, this is what we got. And all of these moral complexity problems are the makings of that global, historical, political, social reality. And we don't have what we dream of. We have this. In a sense, I've gotten to that point where I say, you can sound really cynical about that. Or my sort of moral place in this moment is, well, what's so different about that than most Christians through most of time in most places? I mean, you read the New Testament, and this is exactly the problem that one of the major problems the New Testament is trying to deal with. What does it mean to live in an immoral political and social environment? And how does the kingdom of God manifest itself in the midst of that? And so what we're looking at is this profound global reality that has developed since the Enlightenment. And we are also looking at a very central theological and ethical issue of every faith, but for us, it's a moral issue of Christianity in particular. And you look at
Mhm.
the Old Testament, if you're Jew, you've got the same problems. The Jews lived under many immoral kings. They lived under many immoral empires. And so they were also trying to imagine, what does it mean to be the people of Zion, in the midst of empire, you killing other people or empires killing you. And that's exactly what we live in. And so there's really no easy answers. There's literally, the incomplete and humble sort of way of trying to follow the very best of who Jesus was and who he wants us to be. And so I have much more humble expectations, and also very practical ones at this point. I'm a lot 20 years older than you, Tripp, and a lot more older than you, Tim. And so what will change by the time I'm on the other side? There will be things, and I certainly work for those changes. I don't let that stop political activism, but I also recognize that there are some pretty stark historical limits on us right now. And I think, Tripp, you're trying to communicate that. This is the problem of the nation state. Just like there was a problem of the empire, there's a problem of nation states. And we have all of them right now.
Yeah. Tim, are you about to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, Tim.
Well, maybe. I don't disagree with any of that, Diana. Obviously, I think that's true. I'm wondering if I was thinking about what you said in the very beginning about like this savior complex concept, right? Of just like, oh, this person will fix the problems. Because you're right. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Trump is so popular, right? There are people who think that he's going to drain the swamp, whatever that means, and he's gonna make America great again, whatever that means, etc. Right? So, I get that. I just wonder, for people who are maybe millennials or whatever, people who are in my spot. I'm this is a hunch, but I feel like the reason we got to this point is because we're realizing that like the situation that we're in many ways, like it doesn't have to be this way. Meaning, like, why can't we still get affordable healthcare in this country? Why can't we get affordable education in this country? Why are people worrying about surprise medical bills coming in that could actually bankrupt them, right? Why is the wealth gap only growing? The top 1% now own more wealth than the bottom 60%. And so I think what happens is there are all these, maybe we call it late stage capitalism. I don't know. That's not my expertise, but there are all these things happening, at least in the American context, where we go, okay, well, if we're the so-called wealthiest country on earth, much of it earned through unethical and exploitative means, granted, of course. What the average person is asking for is not a crazy ask, right? They're just asking to be able to survive. And really, they're asking for the agreement that many people were taught to be made good. And I was taught, if you work hard, if you work your 40 hours, work a full-time job, you can make it in this country. You can put a roof over your head, you can raise a family, you can live. And most of us are like, that feels like a multi-level marketing shtick that was just, you could work part-time for full-time income, well, I tried that. Literally, I did try an MLM, and that's not true. It doesn't work that way. And so I just wonder if like the savior complex is part of it, is because people don't know how to make the change or get what they want done because they feel powerless. So they're looking at people in power, in this case, the president or federal lawmakers, and saying, like, okay, if you're going to campaign on this, we're going to vote for you, but can you please get it done? We need someone who can say, I have political equity and power to actually try and get this thing pushed. And so I just wonder if that's part of the whole, complex that we're dealing with, because people just feel so desperate and so powerless. And then I wonder long term, and I'm not the person to answer this, I don't know, how long that pressure can exist in a country before something snaps, whether it is some kind of violent revolution or people elect someone who is going to claim to shake things up and take back the country. I just wonder how long we can live under this kind of pressure before we go, guys, I can't do it anymore. I can't live in this much debt just to survive. I'm not taking out loans to have a second house. I'm just trying to get through college. I just wonder how much of the pressure, or how much more pressure people, the average person and below average poverty, on like the poverty line level, how much more we can survive before we say enough is enough. Like something has got to change because this is just unstable.
Yeah.
Tim, I think that's just, I mean, those are all things that obviously I care about. I'm working toward, those are things I hope to see change.
Yeah, 100%.
Before I leave here, before you guys do my memorial service 25 years from now, okay?
50 years from now. Let's go way out there. 50, 60, 80 years from now.
There you go. I'm going to be the oldest woman in America. I mean, I do hope those things change. And, I can't, I've never seen anyone write about this, but I think it's well worth thinking about, is that I think that that what you were talking about, that the pressure valve started to, I think it all started to change with the election of Obama. I think that that's what Obama's election was all about. And I think he got in, and the first thing they decided to really tackle was healthcare, which was huge because that was the very first thing the Clintons tried to tackle, and it did them in.
Right.
And so Obama decided to take the riskiest choice first. And even though he knew what the recent history of that was, and, I was actually there. I was actually in the room where some of that happened in the White House. I was invited in to be part of groups that actually were working on some of those issues. And I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it actually terrified me of what politics was all about. But they got the biggest possible change given that environment, and the difficulty. I mean, there was one time when something happened behind the scenes, and I can never say what it was, but I was traveling and I wound up sitting huddled in a corner on my cell phone at O'Hare Airport, sobbing and shaking. It was that bad. And so this is not easy stuff to do. But anyway, they did the best that they could. And what was really interesting is immediately following that, there was the hyper reaction. And the hyper reaction was twofold. One, it led to really fueling the Tea Party, so that in 2010, nearly every legislature and the Congress, etc., in the entire country went to Republicans. It was that strong of a backlash against the moderate Romney-designed Affordable Care Act.
Right.
And then, on the other hand, in 2010, progressives decided it didn't go far enough, and so they decided to sit out the 2010 election to protest, to show Obama that they were mad at him. And so what that did for 2010 to 2012 was literally hogtie anything else Obama wanted to do, including immigration reform, which was next up after the Affordable Care Act, and then fight for the 2012 election, which he did not win by very much. It was actually an incredibly close election. And because of the red tide that had swept through state houses and swept through Congress in 2010, even when Democrats won the presidency under Obama, there was only an ability to there was a wave back towards liberals, especially more progressive people, but it didn't undo the red tide of 2010. And every single district in America was redistricted as on the basis of the 2010 election. So we got, as a counter reaction to the Affordable Care Act, we got the Tea Party, we got the red wave, we got everything taken by Republicans, and we got redistricting for the next decade also taken by Republicans. And so Obama was stuck. I mean, literally, and that's what we have been stuck in since 2010. And I literally, I have never seen any analysis from any smart political person about the importance of what happened in the aftermath of the Affordable Care Act. And of course, that meant that Democrats then were kind of afraid of touching some of these issues again because they saw the tremendous counter response. And I don't know that the Democratic Party, which is one of those nonprofit organizations that we were talking about, seems to be running the country and controls our choices for president. I don't know that they've ever really gotten their grounding again, and that they've never really developed a sound strategy to get past that, because we're not that far past it. We're still living in the aftermath of the first 2 years of the Obama presidency. And I just imagine had progressives not stayed home in 2010, if progressives had been able to accept the Affordable Care Act as a first step, instead of like, oh, I'm going to stick it to Obama because he didn't do what I wanted him to do. If they just stayed in the game and kept pushing and pushing and pushing, maybe redistricting wouldn't have happened on this national level. Maybe the Tea Party would have been unhinged sooner. Maybe Trump wouldn't have had the sort of empowerment to get to where he eventually got to, just, a few years later. And so those are all things that we can't know. Those are the historical roads not taken, but they are lessons that we should be able to learn from. And what I think Democrats really truly need to do is to say, okay, we're just not going to let 2010 happen again. And how are we going to do that? We can do it probably by, I think part of what they should do is to be a lot braver about more progressive policy, and to develop political strategies in advance of doing something like this that allows you to get further down the road, just like you want it to. All those things need to happen. All those things.
One of the...
I asked the question, how can we help that theologically and morally? How
100%.
how can we do that? And we three have big mouths.
Yes, we do.
Whether it helps or not, we'll find out. Andrea asked a question about, she said that it seems that our democracy is having a problem functioning, and I wonder how a process relational framing helps think about the predicament of democracy. And because she sent it, and I was like, oh, this sounds like fun. I sat around thinking about it, and it actually, the kind of thesis statement that connects what Tim was saying at the individual level and what you're talking about at the kind of more structural is, I think the nation state and citizens within it are at a point where the challenges outrun our agency, right? So the challenges of what the deal you thought you were handed as an individual, the working hard, whatever agency you have, the challenges outrun it. And when you look at the challenges as a nation state, or the economic system, or even the way our political system works out, the agency outruns it, and it got me real depressed. I wrote down 4 sentences. I told Diana I wanted to try it out on her.
And Tim's here too, so try it on.
I'm ready.
I know that this is Tripp texting himself his ideas and then going like, oh, I just want to see what Diana and Tim think. In part of it, I started thinking, and this is like the kind of process political theorists emphasize this, is that democracy isn't just taking a position, but it's the art of taking, forming, listening, and reforming solutions across difference. And that means it's a deliberative process and not a performative one. And when you don't feel like you have agency, both as a political party, or as a church, or as an individual, then when the more you recognize a lack of agency, the more your identity becomes performative rather than deliberative. And it makes perfect sense why that would be the case, because you realize your own actions don't have traction or don't have grounding or don't have purchase. So then where is it that you would define yourself as in a performative engagement in the public square as opposed to a deliberative one? And so like in our age, like one of the things we're in, and I think this is because our units of the hyper individualism of modernity and the kind of the function of the nation state, is that the time we need for democratic decision making is actually increasing as the world becomes more complex. It gets faster. It gets more dynamic. There are more things that one would have to take into account, more perspectives and voices and such, if you're going to do a deliberative process as opposed to a performative one. And those are not the incentives in the public square, and those are not the incentives for the individual. And I think it gets even more intense because of the cultural change, where as our culture diversifies and becomes less traditional, right, where there's not a cultural monologic at the center or some dominant expression, which moving past that's been life-giving to tons of people on the margin. But then in a culture without a monologic and such, there's much less that can even be assumed or shared when you begin the deliberative process. And that puts an increasing demand upon democratic consensus and what it would look like for a deliberative process. And so both of those features, right, make this sense where our agency cannot keep up with the challenges. Then throw on it that nation states are now having to decide more and more decisions with an irreversible horizon.
That's right.
And those with irreversible horizons, be it how we mess with nukes, how we engage the environment, how we negotiate AI regulation, how we decide about genetic engineering. All those things have a lot larger horizon, and they deserve more deliberation. At the very time, under the nation state, using democracy, the incentive structure is more for performative reflection rather than deliberative. And so like that anxiety that I think you get expressed sometimes in the individual level, or in the anxiety that comes up in the political consensus, where it's just like, I got to get my base to turn out. I got to level this up. I'm going to play around with democracy. All those things could be the thing isn't the thing. We keep pointing at the expressions of this, but I think both of you are getting at something that when I got that question, I kept thinking about it, is that what's demanded for a democracy today to do well, knowing the challenges, the pace of change, and all this kind of stuff is more deliberative, slower reflection, because more has to go in to do it well. But the incentive structure for culture, for elections, for all these kinds of things is increasingly more narrow. And so the challenges outpace our agency as individuals and as collectives. And that's something that is killing us. And so like when that's the case, the only thing you can think of is savior complex. The only thing you can think is like the one true king who has the exception, right? And in modern political theory, right, it was Carl Schmitt who developed the political theory that gave Hitler the exception in Germany, because they were facing a lot of these things after World War I. And so what you need is the chief executive, who is the one who can stand outside the system, the law, and do something. And so that desire,
and either break it or fix it.
Right. And so that desire, right, even for it, like when we're looking at Christian nationalists, or you're like, why is Bibi Netanyahu still in charge, or all these kinds of things? Part of it could be that even all the people that are there and our political agents go, we know we don't have agency to fix this individually and collective. And the only option we have, the only thing we can think is be someone who's beyond the law or beyond the structures, because we don't know what it would look like to do them well. And I wonder if there's a solution to it in the present. But that question, listening to y'all, that was my notes to myself. And there you go.
I have a question for the professor. So if a savior is sort of the hyper energized, leader model of the performative democracy, what would be the model leader in the deliberative one?
Well, so here's the thing. I wonder what of our institutions that we've inherited before the kind of post-World War consensus actually function that way. Think about how all the denominations have handled fights. It's not been deliberative. It's been performative. Even those that go into it meaning well. See, part of I think the predicament is connected to what's expected by the citizen or the laity or whatever is like once your agency's been removed, what do you do? And underneath it, I think part of what's making it worse is, well, there's two sides. One is are the psychological mechanisms for human beings to feel safe at home and such you see getting expressed right in our self-sorting. Because human beings, the experience of recognition occurs when you encounter someone and there's the recognition of shared value, identity of some sort. And so part of this self-sorting, be it in religion or in where we live or who you hang out with or your algorithm, right, is reinforcing that this is where you find like-mindedness that's good for your sense of self. But the outcome is a whole bunch of tribes that are celebrating their identity performatively. And I think the other side of it is that the incentive structure economically and politically has got to the point, and one of the examples I think you gave, Diana, in that after 2010 is when we had the census and reorganized our congressional spaces, right? So you don't go to a church where you have to work across the aisle, and you don't run for election where you're fearing the other party. You're fearing the wing on your own. These kind of things make like the incentives for deliberation go down. But see, I even get that thinking of how many clergy have shared in previous groups, Diana, or emailed us where they feel pressure not just to agree with their congregation about their deep values and commitments, but they need to perform that particular answer regularly. You can see it in we obviously, it's easier to notice it right in the other tribe, but there has been that shift since the 90s where, initially both earlier in mainline religion and then in evangelical spaces in America, where the clergy drove political reorientation and then the laity followed. But now there's been a shift where the laity are expecting tribal allegiance to be performed by their clergy. And so you get both mainline Protestant ministers and even I heard Russell Moore even say this. He said how many Baptist ministers are telling him they're like, I'm now being expected to be a Trumpistan member from the pulpit, and if I don't do it directly, they're like, let's go get a real biblical Christian, and so that
Which makes life really difficult in mainline congregations, because no matter which one of those choices you make in a mainline congregation, you're going to lose people.
Yeah,
because they're actually divided communities in most cases.
Yeah, I don't think most people know that just because all the clergy aren't that divided.
Right, that's right. The clergy are not divided, but
mainline clergy, when you're like they're divided blue and red, the red is the DSA, not
not the Republican Party. No, so I'm just still really curious. I mean, Tripp, I think this is. I think you got this is very, very insightful.
I agree.
I really appreciate it. And I'm still trying to think about, okay, if you have the model, say, just working with this election, deliberative and performative, what you've gotten, I mean, I think Biden is deliberative in an old-fashioned way with structures, systems, and maybe a worldview that doesn't carry over as you suggest, Tripp. You're saying that maybe these structures just don't work anymore. Look at something's happened. The older models themselves for how you do this kind of deliberative leadership are wrong. But that's what Biden's been trying to do. Biden's really schooled in all those older models of deliberative leadership. And he never was charismatic. I mean, he's never been performative. He's always been the behind the scenes, cut the deals, work the system. And the old system he knew like nobody's business. He lived it. And Trump obviously is hyper performative, which is, I think, part of the reason evangelicals love him so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because it echoes what goes on in their congregations. And so you have really a deliberative person versus a performative person. But the problem is that the deliberation is happening on the basis of deliberative structures that can no longer meet the challenge. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's like someone who thinks we should keep using Robert Rules of Order at church meetings.
Oh, Lord have mercy. God bless every one of our Presbyterian friends, but throw the book away.
Well, and when you inherit, right, like if you think the deliberative process is set by institutional assumptions and relations that an increasing number of the younger generation, like Tim was raising, go, oh, those assumptions are faulty. Look at my pocketbook. Look at what we're funding across the sea. Look at how weak you've been in responding to things you ran on. Look at who you threw under the bus first and compromised with. Like the deliberative process he's inheriting is one where it's like he sees a level of spit shine on institutions that kind of those that came of age post 9/11, I think go, it's like, and I've experienced this on staff at mainline clergy when you're the only one of a younger generation where you're sitting there and you're going, why are we spending so much time, energy, and money on the few parts of our church life that everyone 70 or above really enjoys and loves? And if you just look at the actual surveys we gave out, all the young families and younger and single adults, kids and youth are like eye roll. Right? Like there's whose values are the non-negotiables? Whose values are the non-negotiables? And I think one of the things Trump and Biden agree on is I can't imagine a world where the anxiety, fear, and assumptions of boomers don't dominate. And so like part of the energy, I think that of people that would ask like Ryan's question, there's a bunch of people that asked it, is like whose values, we may have like shared values, but like the priority list is surprisingly who's get cut first. It's youth minister preaching Sunday. It's, you cut through it. It's like who's at the decision making table are the same people that generated the crisis. And so you go, but I think that a lot of people my age and younger think the same thing when they look at mainstream media, right? So there's a recent study that came out that if you're under 35, only 20% of people ever look at mainstream media at all. And yet, if you listen to political discourse for boomers and older, they all watch mainstream media. They pick their tribe one probably the most. But all the things that are left off the table there are the things that I think younger generations go, yeah, well, what about this one? Like, did y'all write $684 checks a month for student loans? And were told by your parents avocado toast cutting would fix it. But there's just this element of like where it's like dialing up you don't know what the cost of milk is. The generational shift is so different, and part of that generational shift is those having institutional memory of it working. And the other is you handed kids and grandkids a world where the anxiety that the system you gave them generated, like you don't understand it. And so your advice is one that assumes keeping in place the things you're experiencing as generating like a lack of flourishing. And so that I think that's a part of it, but I know we're not supposed to go over. So
yeah, I would like to
say something before he disappears.
I know I want Tim to talk to, but go ahead, Tim. You talk.
No, I have nothing to add. Keep going. I'm listening.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that one of the things that is interesting is that, yes, Biden functions out of all of that. I mean, I basically don't even think of him as functioning out of a boomer sense. of the world. It's my mom's. He's more really my mom's generation, and which is great. I'm glad a lot of those people are still around. They're really wise, and I'm grateful for their presence in my life. But it is hard to run a country that way, and yet there are two things. I don't know if this would give Tim any hope. Where to me, watching Biden slowly begin to be able to hear younger adults has actually been occurring. And that is around the student loan business, which got, thrown into the garbage can by Trump's Supreme Court, by the way. Bing,
Yeah.
bing, 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 bing. It's not Biden's problem. It's Trump's justices that threw that Biden's plan away. So Biden knows about those $684 checks, and he hates them, I think. And at least because they take votes away from him, if nothing else. And so he's been trying to manipulate the system that he knows really well in order to relieve as much of that debt as he possibly can, which shows that he's paying attention to very important issues, I think, of young adults. And the whole business with Gaza, I think, has shown a slow, grandfatherly transformation of somebody sitting at a table yelling at him, saying that we just can't do it this way. Because in Biden's generation, when they thought about the state of Israel, they thought about Paul Newman and the Exodus. And if you even know what that movie is, I will be surprised. So he's thinking that Netanyahu is Paul Newman, and that that God is basically the political force behind the formation of the state of Israel. That's what he's thinking, because an entire generation of Americans think about Paul Newman and the Exodus.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because
he's listening. He's listening.
Look, I hear you on that, and then at the same time, it's another $1 billion to Israel 6 days ago. So it's like, I know things are complicated. I don't want to get stuck in binaries, but I just think that for me and for a lot of people, at least in the space I work with, I can't see any more dead kids. I can't do it. I've seen too many kids who are no longer on this planet, and they don't have to be. It didn't have to be like this, and then think about, and we'll use me as a token example here. Think about me, who grew up right in this ultra conservative, right wing evangelical space, was always told God's on the side of Israel. You were never given the full picture. And then all of a sudden you're like, I should probably do some research on this. And you discover, like, holy shit, this is way more complicated and way more problematic than I ever was led to believe. And this is not like a new thing. This has been happening for a long time, right? And then you start making friends who are Palestinian, and they're Christians, they're nonviolent, but they know what they're talking about. Like my friend Daniel Bonanora. And he's like, open air prison is too soft. We should call it an open air concentration camp. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay. And then you see this stuff, right? And so I don't know. Like, I feel very much stuck because I don't disagree with anything that either of you have said. And we do live in empire. We live in the empire, right? The one that does destabilize other governments for our own purposes. And it's very difficult looking at the so-called most powerful man on the planet and seeing another $1 billion being sent to a nation state that is just indiscriminately bombing women and children and aid workers and journalists, right? But that being said, at the same time, I appreciate that Biden has called out Christian nationalism in his own Biden way. He has made it very clear about the threat that MAGA conservative politics are challenging the nation with. Is that one speech where he had like the red lights behind him? It's like, this is great. I'm glad to see him stand up to Trump. I'm glad to see him call it out. And I do think, like, deep down, not that I know the guy, he comes across as down to earth as a guy like that can come across as. He's had a family, he's experienced major loss in his life, he's lost a wife, he's lost a child. He comes across as someone who he's been scarred by life as well. He's experienced real suffering, right? I don't think he's not empathetic. I don't think he's not deliberative. I think he's all of those things. And maybe to put this in the best light possible, maybe the gap between what he wants done and all of the obstacles to getting that are just so great, right? That he can only move so fast in the power structure that he's working within with his team given Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court, etc. And again, I go back to my earlier statement. I wonder at what level of pressure we're currently under historically, right? Like, I wonder how we're going to look back on this past decade, really, and how the history tellers are going to talk about the immense pressure from all sides that not just average people in America were feeling, but also a lot of them waking up to their government being complicit in war crimes, right? And this has been a legacy of the American empire. Even when it comes to systemic racism, how we have sterilized Black women in our history. You don't get taught that growing up as a child in white America. Then you discover all this stuff and you're like, oh my, what if we're like the bad guys a lot of the time? Like, what do I do with this, right? It's very complicated because you want to be able to use power and divest it to hopefully fight for the well-being of your neighbors and the people underneath the boot of empire. So I totally see the need, right, for the civil rights movement and for all those things and like how we think about that. And I also struggle with all of this other shit that we're talking about. You know?
Hey, Tim, I'm just really curious, Tim. Have you ever read The Irony of American History by Niebuhr?
No.
Yeah.
It wasn't in my homeschooling curriculum.
It was not in the homeschooling.
It wasn't in your homeschooling curriculum. And
that sounds great.
That is the problem.
It is the problem. I'm trying to catch up. I think a lot of us are trying to catch up, right? We're like, oh my God, so much.
It's not your problem. It's the problem that somebody abused you by not giving you that book when you were much younger. Oh my God.
I will order it or I'll find it on Audible and go through it. It sounds like it's a very helpful read for me.
Well, you know, for all the jokes that I've made about the Niebuhrs in my long career, I agree with them more than I don't.
Well, I know we got to wrap up, so I just want to let everyone know you're more than welcome. Come join us online in June, faithandpolitics.net, and we'll not only hear from 6 different scholars in 30-minute lectures where you can use them in groups and discussion and things, but we'll be processing it together. If you want to hang out with us, all 3 of us are going to be at Theology Beer Camp this October in Denver. And Diana, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to have a giant tent, a big tent at Theology Beer Camp, where I don't know if you've preached in a revival tent anytime recently.
The last time I preached a revival sermon was at the Wild Goose Festival about Mary Magdalene. So God only knows what will happen.
Well, now we need to
put me in a tent.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. Thank you all for joining us. And those of you that haven't never met Tim before, that are part of the regular Ruining Dinners, you can go check it out. The new Evangelicals, and connect there. And for those of you that are regular supporters of The Cottage with Diana and Homebrewed, thank you. And we'll see you all again soon.
Can I just say thank you so much to Tim? I adore you, Tim. And one of the things that you do for me is that you and my daughter, who's 26, you guys keep me honest and also keep me fresh. I mean, I would not hear all the questions if it wasn't for being friends with you and really having serious conversations with my Gen Z daughter. And that's, to me, part of the deliberation that we all really need to move to a true democracy, is not only cross-racial and gender work, but generational work.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I'm obviously, a big fan of you and Tripp and others. I mean, I tell you this both often. We need the work that you and others are doing more accessible and more than ever, so people like me can find that better path forward, because I feel very much stuck. Like and it's not that I don't know that there's something else out there. I just don't know where to look or how to distill these thoughts into ways that are accessible and that make me go, yes, deliberative versus performative. I never put those things together before. That's a really helpful framework for how I think about this. So keep going, because I just feel like it's needed more than ever.
Excellent.
Cool.
Well,
thanks, guys.
Everyone, go try your blueberry coffee with
more
creamer.
Go do it.